So quickly, we will go through an introduction of each of the speakers here today, and then we will have a short presentation that I'll walk you through that's kind of an overview of the IRA as it relates to the different programs for commercial solar. The majority of our time today will be a panel discussion with our esteemed panelists, and then we will have some opportunity for some questions and answers after that. So with that, I will turn it over first to Randy, if you want to do an introduction, and then we can kind of go from Randy to Rick to Steve, and then I'll close us up.
Yeah, so good afternoon, good morning, good evening, those of you listening on the recording. Randy Lucas, lead consultant for Lucas Tax and Energy Consulting, based in Charlotte, North Carolina. Keep it real brief and simple. We are accountants and consultants, and we focus on incentives and grants for clean energy and energy efficiency projects. And we had a great quarter last year with the REAP grants we'll talk about later. We filed just under 10 grants totaling $4.3 million in grant requests. So we're having a good year, and really appreciate the opportunity to join you all today. And thank you, Caleb, for organizing this and setting this up. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Great, Rick.
Thank you, everybody, for attending today, and thank you, Caleb, for setting this up. Esteemed colleagues, I'm Rick Gilbert. I'm the Executive Vice President of Solar Source. We are a 40-year, coming up on our 40th anniversary solar contractor in Florida. We've been around for a while. We have 2 offices in Florida serving Tampa Bay since 1984. We are proud to boast over 60,000 clients with a variety of commercial and industrial and residential. If you've been to places like Legoland, you've seen our work, the solar carports, or flown into the Tampa airport. We have, again, a variety of projects from Canada to Cuba, from New Jersey to New Mexico, and we're happy to be here. We also are the founders of Solar Source Institute, which is a Department of Education licensed and nationally accredited solar training school, the second one in the country, the first one in the state. So we're here to share whatever we can today.
Thanks, Rick. Steve?
Hey, good morning, good afternoon. Whatever time zone you're in, I'm Steve Rutherford, president of Tampa Bay Solar. We're a 13-year-old company. We are a veteran-owned, service-stable, veteran-owned business. Been in business since 2010. We service all of Florida. We do commercial, residential systems, and we operate throughout the entire state. So excited to be here and support and answer any questions anyone may have, and talk a little about some of the projects we've been doing. So thanks, Caleb.
Awesome. Thank you. And I am Caleb Quaid. I am the president of Regenerative Shift, which is a holistic environmental consulting firm based in Tampa, Florida. I founded this company 2 years ago, and prior to doing that, I spent most of my career in football, in the National Football League, mostly with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I'm doing operations and capital project management. In that role, I oversaw over $200 million in stadium renovations and new construction for the team. So that's where a lot of my experience in the industry kind of came from. With Regenerative Shift, the idea is to put life at the center of business, and kind of how are we using business in a way that is stewarding the land and the water that's around us. But as a starting point, a lot of companies that I'm working with need to pick some of the low-hanging fruit. And one of the lowest hanging fruits that's out there, I think, is solar for businesses. And so that's why I've gotten into talking about this here today. I think probably the most important thing for businesses to do is probably energy efficiency stuff. I mean, a lot of that has really, really strong ROI, and Randy and I will be doing a webinar about energy efficiency in a few weeks here that will be published shortly. But after you've got some efficiency done, solar is in getting the renewable energy is a big part of that. So want to share with you today, and have a chance to get some questions out of some of these people who have been in this industry for a long time to do that. So I'm going to go to here. I'm going to give a little overview of the commercial solar industry as it relates to the tax incentive programs in the Inflation Reduction Act. And then after I do that quickly, we'll open it up to a panel. So the IRA, one of the big points you should know is the IRA really changed things for commercial solar and made it much more, changed the equation, made it much more financially feasible for businesses to make the investments that are needed into solar, which for businesses, for everybody, but for businesses is a critical element. Having something that's going to have a return is important. And so there are 4 big credits that relate to solar. These credits also relate to other things, but we're here talking about solar today. And the one we're going to spend most of our time talking about, I'm sure, is Section 48, which is the investment tax credit. And that is currently in effect and runs and goes through the end of 2024 before it's replaced by another one here. But at a high level, there's the investment tax credit that is, for the investment that you're making in this case, a solar technology. But there are other credits as well that you could do depending on the type of project that you have. There's the production tax credit. And then coming 2025, those credits will change a little bit more to be more technology neutral. 2 notable provisions that I'm sure we'll touch on a little bit today, but want to highlight. In all 4 of these programs, in order to get the maximum benefit, you must meet the prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements. And this depends on the size of the project. If it's over 1 megawatt in size, that you must have your solar contractor. So if Steve or Rick are working on your project, you need to be asking the right questions to make sure they're paying their employees a prevailing wage, which most are. And then also meeting the apprenticeship requirements, which can get a little bit confusing in the solar industry right now. But if you don't meet that credit, if you don't meet those requirements, it's an 80% reduction in the credit. So 4 out of every $5 that you get in a tax credit is dependent on your contractor that you're choosing, meeting and documenting prevailing wage and apprenticeship if it's one of these large projects. And then the other one that is really important, and I know we have some folks from nonprofits on here, the Inflation Reduction Act opened up the opportunity for organizations that aren't typically taxpayers to get these tax credits through a direct pay option from the federal government. So if you're a nonprofit or a state and local government, a place of worship, a school, and anywhere that, it doesn't typically pay taxes, but could benefit from rooftop solar or other type of solar projects, now there's opportunities to get direct payment from the government for that work, which is a big change that I wanted to highlight. So starting with the investment tax credit, Section 48, as I mentioned, this is the most common credit. And for most projects, unless you are doing a solar farm or have a real specific project, probably the one that's going to be most applicable for your rooftop or small or medium scale commercial solar. This credit also does apply to other renewable energies like wind and geothermal. But today we're going to focus on the solar aspect of that. And generally speaking, this provides a 30% credit. So you spend $100,000 on a rooftop solar system for your business, and you get $30,000 as a tax credit off your tax liability for that year, dollar for dollar. Again, if this project goes over 1 megawatt in size, which depending on your project very well may, then you need to make sure your contractor's meeting the prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements. We will talk a little bit more about these later, so just kind of a quick hit, but there are some bonus credits, and this is one of the big things that changed with the Inflation Reduction Act as well. There is a 10% additional credit if you meet the domestic content requirement that is in the IRA, which right now is a little bit up in the air. There are some companies that are making certain components that might qualify for that. We've yet to have one of the big US solar manufacturers and inverter companies come out and say, hey, here's a package you can go with. So definitely something to ask your solar consultant or your provider on as you're going through the process, but can take it from 30% to 40%, which, just improves the ROI on that if you can do that. And by the end of next year, I think there'll be several companies that have the domestic content side of it worked out. Additionally, there's a 10% bonus if you are in certain communities. So they call them energy communities. A lot of these have to do with old coal production areas, or then also for areas that have environmental remediation needs like brownfields, but can get an additional 10% if you meet the energy community requirement. And then one that I know at least one person on the call is very interested in learning more about today. There is a separate competitive bonus credit program that is around low-income communities. And you can look at the map. I've shared some of this on LinkedIn. a lot of the country falls into these different categories. So the projects you're working on very well may fall into a low-income community. But what's important to note about this is a competitive program. It's not just you meet a geography requirement and you get this credit. You need to apply, and you need to have your project in a certain state to be ready to apply. And actually right now that window for 2023 is open. It opened a couple of days ago, and the first 30-day window, which is when the majority of the credits are going to be given out, closes November 18th. So if you have a commercial project that's located in a low-income community that is going to be breaking ground here pretty soon, really good time to take a look at that and apply for a potentially 10, or if you meet certain qualifications on who's benefiting from the project, maybe even 20% of a bonus credit there. In addition to the bonus credits, the government really has made a big emphasis on trying to incentivize people to make these investments in solar and make them now. And so one of the big ways they've done that is through bonus depreciation. And so if you're a business, you're probably familiar with the idea that when you buy a building or equipment or something, you have to depreciate that asset over its useful life. And a solar system that's going to be on your roof for 25 years is typically a 15, 25-year asset. Well, the government shortened that down to a 5-year asset to allow you to depreciate the whole cost of that system as a business expense over a 5-year period. And then they actually, on top of that, have said in 2023, if you install and place this into service this year, which we're starting to run out of time for, 80% of the total depreciation can be done in year one. In 2024, which maybe most of our projects that are starting now would fall into, 60% of that is in year one. So essentially, they're saying you can depreciate this whole thing over 5 years with even more of an emphasis in year one. And what that amounts to, when you combine even just the base 30% credit with, a typical corporate tax rate and the depreciation that works out in 2023, it ends up being close to 50% of the cost of the system can be written off for a for-profit business, either in tax credits through the investment tax credit or through the depreciation that's written off as a business expense there. If you're able to get bonus credits, it could be even more than that. So really the big thing is they've made this pretty strong for businesses. If you're looking for an opportunity to make a good investment in solar and do so in a way that is getting you good ROI, now is the time. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but in addition to in lieu of the investment tax credit, a business can choose the production tax credit. So this, instead of the investment tax credit, which looks at how much money you're spending on the system, the production tax credit looks on how much you produce, right? And so this becomes an option for certain projects, and it's the first time the Inflation Reduction Act made this solar eligible again for the production tax credit for the first time since 2006. And this, generally speaking, if your cost is going to be lower than average or your production is going to be higher than average, maybe this starts to make sense for you. If you're a solar farm, really looking at energy production as the main output, you might benefit from the production tax credit. And this gives you a tax credit based on how many kilowatt hours you produce. In 2023, it's about 2.7 cents a kilowatt hour, or 0.27 cents a kilowatt hour, or 2.7 cents a kilowatt hour, over 10 years. And again, this project must meet the prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements. It is eligible for some of the same bonus credits, but important to note, it does not qualify for the low-income community bonus credits. That's only for the investment tax credit. Same as the investment tax credit, you can appreciate the cost of the system. It's actually a little bit higher depreciation on the production tax credit because you don't have to take into account some of the tax credits that you're getting to reduce your taxable basis. Moving into 2025 and beyond, because projects that are starting at this point now, depending on the size of the project, might be looking at 2025 when you guys are getting them done. You will be dealing with very similar credits that we're still waiting on a lot of more information on. We certainly, as we get towards the end of next year, we'll be talking a lot more about this. But they have 2 new replacement credits, one that is an investment tax credit and one that's a production tax credit that, from what we know now, are going to function fairly similarly to the current programs, except they are technology neutral. So it's going to be more focused on just how are you generating clean electricity in any manner, and how much is that costing you for the investment credit, or how much are you producing for the production credit? So with that, that is our kind of overview. So I'm going to stop the share here and going to open it up now to our panelists. And so the first question that I'm going to ask, and whoever wants to can kind of jump in first, but would invite all three of you to share from your experience, is you guys all have 15 plus years of experience in in the commercial solar industry in one way or another here. So what are you seeing, that's been the same, or what's changing in the industry over that time? And then how has the Inflation Reduction Act changed the game in the last year for you? So kind of open it up to whoever wants to kind of chime in first.
Go ahead, Steve.
Thanks, Rick. I think, one of the great things that has happened with the IRA is that many of us who've been in this industry for a while have been seeing or dreading the day when folks will no longer see the true value of solar, and that, prior to the IRA, the tax credit was due to sunset, and that there were going to be less benefits available. The industry was probably going to be suffering a lot. So we've seen a reinvestment here in the country because of the U.S. production need. We've seen a reinvestment in solar. We've seen a lot more folks coming to the table that now see the benefit. The 30% tax credit that is due to be around for the next decade or so has provided some industry stability to the industry, enabling us to predict with some certainty what customers are going to be able to benefit and how they're going to be able to save over the years and when they're going to get their return on investment. And I think that's just sparked the industry quite a bit this year. So Rick, all yours.
Well, I'm going to say a lot of what Steve just said. I agree wholeheartedly. There's been a resurgence in commercial interest in solar. Even to say resurgence in interest, I would say as people saw the tax credits start to wind down, now that they've seen the IRA bring it back to 30%, they are aware that these are government programs that could go away at any time. So the sense of urgency to not wait 10 years, even though we have a 10-year extension, is there. I would also say that it's early yet. It's still the first year, but on my side at SolarSource, we've seen that low-income housing developer interest start to perk its way up. They knew that there was an application date expiring. Of course, they know there'll be another application date, but in the meantime, they're all jumping in at the idea of, who doesn't want to save 50% of that money, or they can just give it to Uncle Sam and then it's gone. So there's been a lot more leads and projects developing coming in that way. But I do, to throw back to what we started with, I agree with Steve. There's been a resurgence in commercial interest, but this time that's a little more solid. They're not waiting. They know that there might be a 30% on the books for 10 years, but I think we all know that things could change. A new administration could come in and start, kind of digging holes in the program. So the commercial clients seem a lot more serious than they were before.
I echo and endorse both comments from Steve and Rick. I think from our perspective, what we've seen is, from a tax consulting standpoint, a tax planning, I grinned when Steve talked about the credit declining and starting to, because we were in August of 2022, we were headed to 22%. We were doing tax pro formas at 22% to just kind of see if the project would pencil out. And then, the Inflation Reduction Act came in. I do think that, I work in incentives. So I know incentives work and they do motivate entrepreneurs and business owners. But this is a great time for commercial solar. And I think the conditions are right where there's just really no excuses. I think this is a time where every business needs to evaluate where they are and try to see if, solar, even a small installation, makes sense that you can build upon. And that's the other benefit, is that you do have this relative runway to work with, that you don't have to go for, everything all in 1 year. You can build on this. But the overall goal, I think, also is that, these businesses are finding after they make that investment, they are saving on their energy and their utilities. And the other thing we're seeing, I'll end with that, is that the conventional utility costs are still steadily rising. They are not slowing down. and rate increases are a real thing. And we've seen that a lot on what, businesses at all size and all levels of demand. Those rate increases are something, again, going back to what Rick said, you can't control it. And it could change at any time at the next the rate hearing. That's another thing. So solar is, again, a great hedge against that rising cost for the business.
I would add one more thing, and that's based on this fear that people had before. We're seeing more than ever an increase in the storage business as well. And it has something to do, different than the tax credit expiring in Florida, net metering was under attack. And now the storage is becoming more and more viable because people don't want to have to depend on the deal that the utility gives them anymore for the energy. We're seeing that, and we're also seeing even just AC coupled storage with demand shaving, where artificial intelligence has the batteries now where the average commercial building gets a demand charge based on a 15-minute interval from the previous month, it's based on when your highest draw comes in. And the AI can now sense that, discharge the battery at that time. Batteries just aren't for backup, is the gist of what I'm saying. Discharge the battery at that time, which will move your demand, your high load, to another time of day. Then it learns so that it's discharging on its own cycle according to when you inquire demand, and therefore it's constantly driving that cost down. So it's cutting parts of your electric bill that you previously couldn't cut. You could get rid of your kilowatt hours if you're a commercial business, but your demand charges would stay, because typically,
that's awesome.
If you have a factory, they start before the sun comes up. So when they start up in the morning, that's when they have their high demand. Now the storage can release at just that time. And it applies to homeowners too. They can get a PV system with storage now that does self-consumption mode that releases throughout the night and uses their energy versus having to really count on that deal they get with the utility. So it works hand in hand with the Inflation Reduction Act, both incentives.
Thank you. So Rick, taking it back to you here. So you've been involved with some of the more prominent commercial projects, solar projects in Florida and around the country. What are some lessons that you've learned from those experiences? And then what advice do you have for businesses and nonprofits that are maybe on the fence right now?
So the lessons in construction get learned every day. If someone tells me that everything's worked out perfectly on time and on budget and there was no problems, I basically know that they're pretending to have done commercial business then, because we like to sell ourselves not by as much. We know a lot, 40 years, we know a lot, but we like to tell people that during that time we've learned what not to do. So you learn something new every time, but I have a couple quick notes for you. When you're doing a variety of commercial business, you're going to run into everything. No two jobs are the same. You're going to have rooftop, you're going to have ground mount, you're going to have carports. A solar contractor that's going to build a carport, for example, might not know that their regular solar contractor license doesn't allow them to build a structure. We do ours in-house, but a lot of times they're using a sub. So holding all the applicable licenses to do the job is important if you're a consumer. Do they have any proper general contracting, solar, electrical license, plumbing license in some cases to do this job? The biggest one is the variety of clients and their scheduling. When you're working with attractions, museums, active theme parks, airports, your ability to manage a schedule, and I don't just mean to a deadline of, say, December 31st. I'll give you an example of what I mean. At the airport locally, the certain work had to be done after the last flight left for the day. So you're talking about a mobilization at 1 a.m. to work on a parking garage and build solar canopies, not to mention the various licenses and things you need from FAA permits. So being able to work like in an active theme park, route your traffic, do procedures before and after the job to make sure that everyone that was on that job site is signed out and isn't off lost somewhere, that's important. And then finally, and kind of a smaller one, but important, is does your contractor have in-house engineering? Are they, most solar contractors are sending out to get signed and sealed drawings. But if you're going to do a decent sized commercial project, and I'm not talking about a veterinarian office or something, with a smaller system. I mean, if they're going to be building a megawatt on a roof, if they're going to be building carports in your parking lot, how they permit is a very important part of that. If you have in-house engineering, you can make changes on the fly very quickly. You don't have to send it out. You don't have to fly somebody in. You don't, a lot of times for a carport, the company in California is doing the engineering, and then they have a stamping partner in Florida. That guy's not going to know how to change those drawings. He's going to be sending it out, and you're going to have project delays. If you have in-house engineering, you can make a change that same day. If you know to permit your foundations 3 different ways at the time you permit the job, that way, if you encounter a subsurface condition, you've already permitted the solution. Things like that are kind of important. So for buyers, just to summarize, in-house engineering, the ability to manage a schedule, not just to an end date, but day to day, and holding the applicable licenses would be important.
Thank you. So Steve, sort of similar question. What makes for a successful commercial solar project, and what should a business owner think about solar as they're going through the process of selecting a contractor? And
yeah, I want to echo some of the things that Rick has said. I think to sum it up, it's competence. You know, you're going to need a contractor that is competent, fully understands the quote soup to nuts of the entire project. You know, finding one that hasn't, you know, this isn't their first rodeo for some complex carport system that they've been able to do this before and do that. So you look for the history. You obviously want to look at their reviews, what their customers have said. You want to get their resume and what they've done in the past and what their former customers have said. I mean, we go back 10 years with our first commercial customers and to current and look at what they've been saying about us. And that's why we're so grateful to be such a name in this industry. You know, we have a track record of success, and that's what you're looking for in any contractor, that they have some sort of track record of success, that they've been able to do it before successfully, that they understand the scope of work, more importantly, and that they have the knowledge. I mean, I'm grateful to be, you know, I've got a master's in physics, so I've got a really good understanding from soup to nuts, from every part, from the groundwork to the roof work to the different types of roof, to different types of ground systems. So when you bring that breadth of knowledge to a project, it really provides the security and sanity that a customer needs when they're going forward with a commercial project. So yeah, I think Rick said some great things. So.
Thank you. And I know you had also, when we were talking in the briefing, wanted to talk through utility partners and then how demand and non-demand factors in a little bit. You want to share a little bit on that?
Yeah, I think a lot of folks don't understand when you know, especially commercial contractors, that you know, demand is a big factor. And if you don't consider that charge in a project, or how you can reduce or eliminate the demand of a project, and many times, you know, you may have a $10,000 electric bill and thinking that, hey, this solar project is going to be able to make all the energy you need to get rid of that energy need, but it's not going to get rid of that demand unless, like Rick said, you're going to have to put some type of battery or storage system in there to handle those peaks and demands that will come with the project. And when you're doing that, you're adding 20, 30, 40% cost to the project. The great thing is that it is it's tax credit approved, but you still have to add that cost if you're going to get rid of that demand charge. Because many times when you're doing a large project, utilities are not going to reduce that demand cost for you. And then sometimes your demand need is outside the window of your solar. So it's 5 to 8 in the morning, and sun doesn't come up until 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the morning in some areas. So that demand's still going to be there. So make sure you're factoring that into the cost, into your overall return on your investment. So.
Thank you. So Randy, kind of switching gears a little bit here, but I know you mentioned, you know, doing 10 this past quarter with the Rural Energy for America program, REAP. Can you give our audience an overview of that program and how it ties back to the investment tax credit?
Yeah, thank you. So the Rural Energy for America program is a USDA authorized program. It comes out of the Farm Bill. So REAP existed before the Inflation Reduction Act. What happened was the Inflation Reduction Act sent 1.7 billion into the program, and the USDA has been working to help more projects because they have more funds available for these grants. Now, grants used to be 25% of the project cost, but with this additional funding from the Inflation Reduction Act, the USDA did 3 key things. One is that they raised the limit on the size of the project there are two categories. So there's energy efficiency improvements. So those projects are capped at roughly $1 million. And then solar projects are capped at about $2 million. Second big change was that the USDA raised the cost match. So again, as I said, it was 25%. It's now 50% for an eligible project. And let me step back in a sec. The Rural Energy for America, the rural, means that this project's not available in every location. There is an eligibility map. I think we have a screenshot of that in a second, but it's not every location. But if you are in a rural area, and there are more geographically, there are more rural areas than non-rural areas. But if you're in a heavily congested downtown area, it's based on census data. But this is an example of screenshot of this eligibility map, and I put in a QR code. If you want to go and pick that up, the link to the eligibility map. But this is our starting point. And we've determined the address of the location, and you can go in there, go in under rural business, and then it'll ask you which program and select the top group for REAP. And then you'll see this map, and you just put in this address and hit go, and it'll let you know if you're in an eligible area. But again, the best part about it is that the USDA used to do this 1 or 2 times a year. Now they're doing this every quarter, meaning they are evaluating projects constantly every 90 days. And it's a statewide competition. So you're not competing with, a heavily populated state, and everything's state by state. And then it's also the allocation of that $1 billion is also allocated to the states. And so we've seen a 10x increase in North Carolina, where I am, and the other states we filed: Georgia, South Carolina, Tennessee. We filed in other states. We've also filed in Oregon. But we've seen that all those states have increased funding. They want to fund these projects. And again, going back to our earlier overview, where we're looking at the tax credits meeting the prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements, and then possibly also having something like domestic content or being in a low income community, you can see where all of these incentives, including the REAP grant, they don't cancel each other out. They do stack on top. I will say REAP grants are taxable income to the awardee, so they do have to take it into income. But we have a project that's underway now. It's a $1.7 million solar roof-mounted system, and they have applied for a REAP grant, qualified for that. They also qualify for the 30% investment tax credit. They're also in a low-income community, and they're pursuing that. So that $1.7 million project is coming down to right around $350,400 after everything's all said and done. And oh, by the way, it's cutting it's a heavy demand manufacturing facility to do a lot of government military contracts. So they're constantly busy, heavy demand, and supporting our troops and supporting the uniforms. And so it's they deal in textiles, but they're able to cut their energy costs by 40 to 45% going forward. So it's just just a abundance of incentives all kind of working together to help the company grow and save on those costs. Those pain points that Rick and Steve talked about with the design and everything else is also the aftermath of operating the system, and they're to have all of these things kind of operating and lowering their costs are just tremendous benefits. But the REAP again is very much available. and the next quarter is coming up December 31. And then we have 3 more after that, March, June, and September, to file for applications in the system, get it evaluated by USDA, and see if, again, you can find additional funding for the project.
Thanks. Yeah, what I'll just say at a high level there's, there are many different, well, the IRA has 133 programs, and then there are different incentives through states and through utilities. And I think it speaks to the value of having somebody to help you navigate that type of stuff. Randy and I have worked on several projects together, and so as you're evaluating these types of things, as Rick and Steve were talking about, you want to make sure you're choosing the right contractor. And then also, if there's an opportunity to work with somebody who can help you navigate these things, in some cases, if you check all the boxes with REAP and some of these bonus credits, it's literally almost free by the time it's all said and done. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, one thing I did want to underscore, I forgot, it is coming out of USDA, Department of Agriculture. Of course, it's part of the Farm Bill, and that's where, but it is open to small businesses in those rural areas. And the definition of a small business is based on the industry and where it's operating, in the U.S. And sometimes that's based on revenue, sometimes that's based on number of employees, but it's the definition of the Small Business Administration. So in that case, this 1.7 million, that's a business, that's a small business in the eyes of the government, and doing very well, but with 400 employees, but their industry, limit is 1,000 employees, so they qualified. So it is open, of course, in the agriculture business space, but of all parts of that sector. But again, the small business, so you could have again, veterinarian, or the restaurant or something in a small business in a rural area in the state, could qualify for these exact same benefits as ag producer could be eligible for. It's not available for everybody, but if you're in those eligible areas and you can use that map to determine a place, we definitely just underscore what Caleb said. We definitely want to talk to you about pursuing these grant funds in addition to the credits. Again, it's a great time for commercial solar, especially in rural areas.
Perfect. So we're got about 17 minutes left. We got one more question here, then we'll open it up for Q&A. So maybe just a couple minutes on this topic, even though bonus credits is hard to cover in a minute or two. But it's definitely, in my role, the question I'm asked about most frequently. REAP is a pretty popular question, but it's about these bonus credits and what's going on with them as we're getting them figured out. So at this point, I know I have a couple thoughts that I can chime in on as well, but for the panelists, what do we know about these bonus credits and what don't we know yet? Anybody want to chime in and share a little bit about what we know and don't know yet?
Do you mean in terms of the 10% domestic content?
Yeah, that's one of them. Yeah.
So for the domestic content, it's 10% right now. The one thing about the IRA is guidance has been continuously coming out throughout the year. That it was put out in good faith last year, and a lot of new information has been forthcoming all year. Many of us on here, I know Steve, probably Randy, I know you, Caleb, have had other discussions about the IRA leading up to now, and the information has grown. There was a little period of time at the beginning of the year where the seminars I was involved in was basically the sheet that SIA put out or that IRS.gov put out, and it said information forthcoming. My understanding of the domestic content today is that the domestic content requirement is going to scale up every year. It's 40% at the moment, and every year you're going to have higher and higher domestic content. Now, it's not that hard to reach. It's a little harder than it used to be when the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act funds were out, where it was 95%, but American solar contractors were using mostly American goods. In fact, they only had the 5% requirement because you couldn't find a TV for your monitoring system that was made in America at the time. That
Right.
said, if you have your major components in there right now, you're going to get the domestic content. The panels are a big one, and there's not a lot of options made in the United States, but there are some. There's inverter manufacturers that are here in the United States. And typically, most of your iron and steel, aluminum is going to come from an extruder that's stateside. So if you do those things right now, you'll meet it. It will become more and more difficult as time goes on to get the domestic content. As far as the other credits go, my information there is limited. I'm working with a developer right now that does affordable housing, and they've done some of their own research as well, and they're really banking on some of those credits for developing, certain low-income housing. But to read the code and understand that it goes a little over my head, only because of the fact that I don't work in their industry. So I've taken the approach as a solar contractor. I know that that's how we sell. I know that I want to understand those incentives very well, but because I'm not a tax accountant or an advisor, like Randy there, I'm going to tell my customers in those areas, here's the information, how you translate it with your accountant. And I've taken that approach till now until I can understand it a lot better.
Thanks, Rick. Yeah, I think on the domestic content, the challenge, I think, is not so much in finding people that probably meet it. It's the documentation requirements that come in. There was a guidance that came out in May that really threw this industry for a loop a little bit. I think there was people expected, if you have one, Mission or First Solar or one of these domestic manufacturers that were making final assembly in the United States, I think the assumption was, at least for a period of time, that would qualify and maybe be a ramp up to more of the components. The way they released the guidance, it says, unless all of the major components are also made in the United States, then you need to go through this kind of complicated math accounting that I think to some degree even has some challenges with what the manufacturers are typically willing to release. So I've been following it very closely, trying to find the first manufacturer that comes out and publishes a press release. And there's this one that I saw that's like a very, very small manufacturer out of Wisconsin. But generally speaking, the big boys, as far as I'm aware, and I'm watching it as close as I can, haven't really come out and said that yet. So if you were trying to go for that domestic content bonus in a project that's taking place right now, you'd certainly want to have somebody working with you who could really follow that paper trail the whole way through to make sure that you're meeting that requirement.
To add one thing there, Caleb, for what it's worth, this was the same exact, it's like a cookie cutter approach that happened during the ARA funding. And everyone will see within the next 12 months, the manufacturers will be providing very legal type letters to get you to buy their product. When the ARA funds were out, that was the commercial industry at the time. It was RFPs through that act, through President Obama and his predecessor George Bush, that was grant funded, like county municipal type projects, and you didn't really get commercial projects hardly at all, except for those. And that's what they did. The manufacturers all get their legal team on it. So I would say forthcoming soon. It'll be a matter of time before you'll see those legal documents included when they try to sell you the panels and the inverters and stuff. So it will work itself out.
Yeah, I had a conversation with one of the big domestic manufacturers, and they said by Q3 of 2024 they would have everything in place. So it's kind of, and maybe some of that's
a long time.
Yeah, it's a long time from now. Yeah, I know. But if they're trying to figure they're actually literally building manufacturing plants to do it. So there's
okay.
So it depends on how you're going about it. But there's definitely if the goal of the domestic content was to spur domestic manufacturing, which is certainly one of the goals, it's been very effective. I mean, you see all these inverter companies publishing, we're building a new plant in Minnesota and we're doing all this different stuff. So it's coming. Yeah. It just is a little bit of a transitional period that we're in right now.
I will wonder out loud if they'll end up bending the rules a little bit if you belong to the WTO, the World Trade Organization, you'll qualify, which is what they eventually did with the American Recovery Act and Reinvestment Act. They opened it up that if you belong to the WTO, so essentially a South Korean manufacturing plant ended up qualifying as they got involved in that. It didn't start off that way, but that's what they did. If you were in the WTO, it basically counted as domestic content. I'm not sure if that's what they'll do here, but that's how it went the last time.
Yeah, they haven't
published that. Well, one thing I want to add is I think I get a lot of questions about why. Why are we having this? and from a number of different perspectives, but one of the things was it is the theory of change that the Inflation Reduction Act legislation was designed to do. The design was to find a way to bring back more manufacturing in the U.S. And that has definitely happened, and the world has reacted to it. And by the way, the domestic content impacts electric vehicles and other technologies as well, and battery energy storage, right? And so those materials are vital, and you are seeing a lot of states enticing to get more manufacturing done. So again, as I said earlier, incentives are there to modify behavior. And so we are seeing that. And I think it is a good thing. I definitely underscore what Rick was saying about the guidance. If you are brave enough to try to read the Inflation Reduction Act, the 700 some pages, but you'll see in there, it talks about, additional guidance will be forthcoming, additional guidance will be forthcoming. And I think it was designed to get to get the Senate and the approval on board, but then also that was a objective of the current administration to get more domestic production here. So that's one thing I wanted to underscore. The other, I guess, the mechanicals of it right now. There was a portal that did open up on October 19th, I believe. So you could start registering your projects, and as Caleb outlined in the overview, some of that is the low income is a competitive. So even though, going back to my example of the project that's got the REAP, that's got the ITC, and they're in a low income, they know they're in a low income community, they still need to follow the steps to get the project registered. And it's not, again, it's not as simple as just saying it on the tax return. That has to be approved and granted before they can take that additional 10% that they may be definitely eligible by the map, but they're going to have to do that. And once that amount of projects are registered, I believe in that category, 700 megawatts. Once government receives 700 megawatts, they're going to stop. They're going to have another competitive round next year, but that is limited. The other grants, the other incentives, the ITC or the PTC, those are unlimited. And as current policy has it right now, but those are the main things we are focusing on. A lot of people are asking about it, and just again, more to come as we've heard in these other webinars. Just look for additional guidance because it's out there, it's in the law, it's going to happen. It's just we got to have that additional guidance to really know how to apply and go after these amounts. But I am very optimistic about the domestic content and where that could go in the future.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, I'm going to weigh in real quick. Nothing more to add. Again, a lot of us are like Randy and Rick has said, we're waiting for guidance. All of us are looking for that list of approved U.S. manufacturers, approved, everything there to come out. One thing though, if you're on the consumer side of the house, what you will find is what I would recommend you do is you weigh if it takes a year or 2 years for this other benefit to come out. A lot of our customers return their money within 5 to 7 years on the investment they make. So by waiting 2 years, you're actually could be missing out because you're paying retail for the next couple of years on your utility bill when you could have taken advantage of a 30 or 40% tax credit and paid for that system, just by, within the time period that you were waiting to get that other 5 or 10% out of the system. Because many times our commercial customers are well over 12, 15%, some of them even 20% ROI. And, trying to wait for 5% to get when you're losing 12% a year doesn't really make sense. So weigh that factor, and I would, definitely reach out to Randy and Caleb and talk about that cost benefit analysis. So
Yeah.
that's all I have to add on that one.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's also the government is incentivizing things with the accelerated depreciation to do it this year and next year, not to wait for some of that too. So it's really kind of that whole equation. All right, at this point, we get a few minutes left. We'll turn it over. I know Christoph has his hand up, and then I know there was a question in the chat as well. So we'll start with those two and then see what we have time for. Go ahead, Christoph.
Yeah, hello. I have a question. I'm here with Hightower Industries down in Southwest Florida. It's about the low income areas. Do I see it right that it's as not well cooked as the same thing with the domestic content, is that you can only apply in that window once per year and your system is not turned on yet? That pretty much leaves anybody who has been like waiting for that program to get those additional 10%. He has to wait for like 3/4 of the next year until he can like apply for that again. Is that right?
Yeah, I can chime in on that. So for this year, they came out in the webinar that I watched on this, and they admitted that it took them a little while to get their ducks in a row for 2023. But yeah, so what Christoph is referring to, it's like this little bit of a sweet spot in the next 25 days or so, in that your project needs to have all permits in hand, but not be completed in order to be eligible to apply for this program. And you've got, a 30-day window in the course of a year. So that certainly is a hurdle to overcome. And so I know Steve and I were trading some emails on it last week, and it's some of this stuff, they're going to have some different windows of different guidance coming out for next year, but it's good to think about for the projects that you have that might, fit into that sweet spot and to do that for future years. There's also the low income stuff, depending on your perspective and what you're looking for or what your project is. It could be a good thing or not. It is very much a climate justice, economic justice initiative. And so if you get into the nuances of how this money is broken up and how they're weighing these things, I don't want to say it discourages, but very little of the allocated capacity limitation is going to be for your standard. I'm a car dealership that happens to be located in a low-income area, and this solar project is going to be a traditional solar project that benefits only me. Very little of the allocation is for that. And if you look at what they're doing, it's like a lot of these behind-the-meter residential projects, and for the 20% credit, it's these projects that are actually giving or benefiting the community with at least 51% of the energy that's produced. So this, if you get into, and it makes sense with what this is looking for, this is coming out of their climate, I forget the name of the department, but it's specifically their environmental justice initiative is what this is coming out of. So in most cases, I mean, it's interesting to look at, and certainly many businesses. I was working with a client earlier today or earlier this year that is in a low-income area and would qualify for this, and certainly could go through the process of applying for it. Their project isn't in that sweet spot of being ready for it, but it's probably not the type of project that they're trying to prioritize, and for good reasons with what they're trying to do with that program. So it is something to look at and kind of see where your project goes and what initiatives it really has. But if it does, then it'd be, a really good program for you.
The key thing what I see is those additional 10%. I agree with you that you need like a special type of client there. But the key thing is why those 10% might make a huge difference are for nonprofits, municipalities, schools, something like this, where they are not eligible for those tax depreciation benefits. And the normal businesses, they have that advantage, but the ones who are like in the need of it, those 10%, they do make a difference. And just having that like 3-week window for the coast over the whole year, that's kind of tight in terms of like, hey, you got to turn that on like right afterwards, but like you got to wait another half a year, and it's another half year or 3/4 of a year of power bills again. As Steve said before, it might make sense going that route.
Okay.
I could comment on that from an installation side, maybe, Caleb.
What's that?
If you want, I can comment from an installation side. So there's a couple things there. Well, first off, Christoph, I agree with you. It's a weird, quirky thing. But what's even more quirky is that your project has to have all of its permits before you can apply. So if you think about it, depending on the size of the project, if someone contracted us now to do that project, yeah, next year would be inconvenient till the third quarter of next year, fourth quarter of next year. But if they signed up anytime between now and May, let's say they reached out to us today, there's going to be a process to go through depending on the type and style of the project, engineering and permitting. That person's going to have already committed to doing a solar project. They might be a large client that's doing a feasibility study. They're paying, $50,000, $100,000 for, but most likely they're already serious about solar. So I think that the real sword here that kind of goes for the throat is the fact that it has to already be permitted, which means they've already done a significant investment toward it before they're applying for this money. So the attitude the customer almost has to take toward this money is, this is bonus money. I'm going to cut my electric bill. I'm going to do a project either way, but I might get this 10%. To do the project counting on it, they probably wouldn't be at the investment stage that it takes to make the application.
That's a really fair point. And there was, if you read through the comments that the IRS and Department of Energy published, there was a lot of pushback on the permitting side of things, and they made the decision. Like, they really came back and said, despite all these comments, we're doing it this way based on it being permitted because we want this money to go and you get this money, you do your project, and that's how they chose to do it at this time. So, but you're right. You have to kind of get pregnant with the job a little bit before to have your permits,
Yeah, you're
so
at risk.
Yeah, it's a little quirky the way they do that. So I know we're getting to, it's a little after 2:00. I know Randy's got to take off here. There was one question that we had, and then I'm able to stay on for a couple more minutes to answer questions if others have questions. But there was a question in the chat about leases. Are they more attractive now, and what's the trend? I didn't know if Steve or Rick wanted to speak to.
Yeah, Steve here. Hey, I will frankly say I'm not a fan, because everything that applies to a lease is not a part of our conversation today for the customer.
Yep.
So none of those benefits will go to you, the customer. They will all go to the person who does the lease. So Rick, if you got a different opinion, please share.
No, I agree with everything you just said there. And other than the residential side, Florida's never been a big commercial lease market anyway. We just got residential leases approved a couple of years ago, so I wouldn't really have anything to add.
Perfect. Yeah, agreed. Okay, so are there any other questions that we have here before we sign off today?
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, really.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Really appreciate
Thanks,
you guys coming and
It's
engaging.
great. Thanks everybody attending, and got any questions, please definitely follow up with us. Happy to talk further. I do need to scoot, but I wanted to thank you again, Caleb, for this. I'll give you a call later.
Absolutely. Thank you, Randy. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Steve.
Right.
Really appreciate
Thanks,
you guys
Steve.
making
Thanks.
time.
Good
to-
meeting y'all. Okay.
All right.
Christoph, thank you.
Thank you.